And I said, this is possibly the most important message for this era, that the message of peace, because we are in this Sabbath day.
Yes.
We're in this 7th millennium. Now, if we look to our older brothers, you know, what the church calls the older brother, the Jews, right? If we look to them, what do they say as they approach the Sabbath? It's Shabbat Shalom, peaceful Sabbath. You know, and we're in it. This is the thing we've got to realize. We are in the Sabbath day. It began 25 years ago, you know, with the new millennium, the 7th millennium. Jesus calls it in the Divine Will Diaries. It's the 7th millennium of man's time on earth. It's the 7th day, the Sabbath day. So if you turn the clock back, let's say 200 years, okay, 200 years, before all this evolutionary stuff came into our lives, it was widely accepted that Adam lived around 4000 BC, and that there were 4000 years from Adam to the incarnation, and that there are 2000 years from the incarnation to now, and those each 1000 years is counted as a day. You know, 1000 years is like a day is like 1000 years. And therefore the 7th day begins at the turn of the millennium. Now, this isn't just my theory. If we go back to the church fathers, let's say St. Augustine.
Yes.
St. Augustine of Hippo, not Canterbury, because there's 2 of them. So St. Augustine of Hippo, the archbishop,
yes,
the doctor of the church, and he wrote that after 6 days or 6,000 years of man's time, there will come an era of peace for the world. There will come, a Sabbath day rest will be granted to the world. A Sabbath day rest. So we're in that Sabbath day rest has begun. The only thing is, I was explaining it the other night, that if you're say 2000 years ago, 1st century Israel, when it goes pitch black at night and it goes 10, 11, 12, 1, 2, you wouldn't notice it so much as you do in modern Western world, because we're watching it on our clocks, laptops, computers, everywhere, right? So we notice the passage of time very carefully. Didn't have any of that back then. So it would have been the sounds of nature and so on. So you don't notice the transition from the 6th day to the Saturday so much until the sun, the first rays of light start to show on the horizon. So that's when you're getting into the Sabbath day. But what we do know is that we're in this 7th day, and God has ordained this as a peaceful day. He has ordained it. He has declared this a peaceful day, and he has prepared us for this. Okay, how's he prepared us? John Paul II, do not be afraid. Open wide the doors, the gates of your heart to Jesus. He's followed by Benedict XVI, whose primary message was a personal encounter with Christ. That's something he wanted everyone to have. And in fact, he wrote his books, Jesus of Nazareth, to help people to have that personal encounter with Christ. So there's the do not be afraid, there's the personal encounter with Christ. What's the one thing that stops us from encountering Christ? Sin. So what does the next Pope do? He gives us mercy. He gives us a year of mercy, an extraordinary jubilee of mercy. He also gives us St. Joseph, so we can learn silence, learn to be attentive to the word of God. So we've had a time over a decade in this kind of this mercy Pope, this mercy time we've been in, that prepares us for what comes next, because there can be no peace with sin. There can be none. You cannot have sin and peace. Sin causes war. Sin causes death. The Bible teaches us that, the wages of sin is death. If you eat from this tree, you will die. So sin causes death. It causes war. What brings peace? Mercy. The removal of sin brings peace. So God has been preparing us with these different pontificates to this one, a wonderful, beautiful Pope. And he's named himself after Leo the 13th.
Yes.
And if we kick back to Leo the 13th, we had several things begin under that pontificate, which are now, if you like, looking like they're coming to completion under this pontificate. So a mission begins with one and it's completed with another.
Yes.
So what began under Pope Leo XIII that was kind of new to the church? Well, the mission of Luisa Picaretta began under Pope Leo XIII. To a degree, it began because he becomes Pope in February. I think it was February 1878. He was elected Pope. Luisa turned 13 April that year, and when she was 13, she stood on the balcony of her apartment in Carato, and she saw a crowd coming up the street with the man carrying a cross, whom she saw was Jesus. And as they get under the balcony, he looks up and he says 3 words: "Soul, help me." And that was the decisive moment for her. That's when she becomes a victim soul. And kind of like the mission begins. That happened under Pope Leo XIII. And it's very important for us to recognize what happens under the different papacies. Why? Well, let me read this to you. This is from Luisa's 3rd diary, and it's called The Purification of the Church. Okay. I saw a pillar, its top touched the heavens. At the bottom of this pillar there are priests, bishops, cardinals, and other dignitaries sustaining the pillar. But some of these were weak, some half rotten, some infirm, some full of mud. So they were not in a condition to sustain it, and the pillar kept swaying. But at the top of the pillar there was the Holy Father, who with gold chains and rays emanating from his whole person did as much as he could to sustain it and to chain and illuminate the people dwelling at the bottom, although some of them were fleeing so as to have more ease in getting rotten and muddy. Not only this, but he did as much as he could to bind and to illuminate the whole world. So the Holy Father is at the top of this pillar of the church, and he's the one, the sole one, who is illuminating and binding. You know, Jesus says, "I give you that which you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven." It's his mission, and it's entrusted to one bishop and one bishop alone, and that's the Bishop of Rome. And that's this one. Notice that at the bottom of the pillar you've got all the other bishops, the priests, the cardinals, and everyone else. None of them have got the mission or the ministry or the charism of the one bishop at the top of the pillar. These are the Pope at the top of the pillar and everyone else at the bottom. So we look at what's happening while the Pope is at the top. So what happened when Pope Leo XIII was at the top? Well, first of all, Luisa becomes a victim. And then on August the 15th, 1889, Pope Leo XIII wrote the first magisterial document on St. Joseph. And at the end of that magisterial document, he wrote a prayer, which was to be prayed at the end of the Rosary in October. I don't think the church has been faithful to that, because I've never come across that prayer in 60 years of being a Catholic. You know, so in all the times I've been praying the Rosary in whatever circumstance, but often in a public circumstance in October, it's never been mentioned. So I think we need to somehow get everyone praying that prayer to St. Joseph straight away. You know, not just October, let's just get praying that prayer at the end of the Rosary. Why? And then 3 weeks after that document is released, the servant of God, Luisa Picaretta, receives the gift of living in the divine will. The first soul conceived in original sin to receive the gift in history. Okay, now that happens 3 weeks after this document of St. Joseph. Why is that important? What's the connection? St. Joseph was the head of the house, of the only house in human history where the divine will reigned. He is the patron of the church. You see, so the Pope, in a sense, may have unwittingly connects St. Joseph and this gift. And in fact, if I was to turn to, let's see, Luisa's 5th diary, March the 19th, 1903, St. Joseph says to Luisa's confessor, "Get to work, for the Lord is ready to give you the grace you want." So St. Joseph is in there chattering away to Luisa's confessor. That's very rare. We don't get many messages from St. Joseph.